He walked into the store with nothing but coins in his pocket and quiet eyes that didn't dare meet anyone's gaze. Within minutes, whispers turned into accusations. A crowd gathered. A shopkeeper pointed fingers. He was called a thief, loudly, publicly, and without proof. People didn't ask questions. They just assumed the worst. But what no one expected was what happened next. Because when the truth came out, it didn't just clear his name. It changed the way the entire town saw itself. He walked into the store with a quiet awareness that he didn't fit the room. He wasn't dressed like the other customers, didn't move with the same ease, and didn't carry the kind of confidence that came from being familiar or accepted. In his hand were a few coins he had counted and recounted more times than necessary, not out of doubt, but fear of being short. He wasn't there to make trouble. He just wanted something simple. Maybe a loaf of bread or a carton of milk. Something small to get him through the day. He moved slowly, respectfully, eyes lowered, shoulders drawn in, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. But none of that mattered the moment the shopkeeper's voice rang out across the store. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was an accusation. Harsh, sharp, and public. The word thief echoed louder than anything else in the room. The boy froze, not in guilt, but in disbelief. Before he could even ask what was happening, people began turning their heads. A customer near the counter stepped back, eyebrows raised. Another started whispering to someone nearby. A third quietly reached for their phone, ready to record without knowing the truth. The shopkeeper insisted he had seen something suspicious, pointed toward a shelf, claimed an item had vanished. There was no verification, no camera checked, no staff consulted. Just a snap judgment dressed as certainty. And in that moment, no one questioned it. The boy tried to speak, but his words never made it past the noise. His explanation, his truth, was buried beneath the weight of other people's assumptions. He was no longer a boy in the store. He was a label, a stereotype, a problem to be dealt with. Eyes followed him not with curiosity, but with judgment. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. His silence was misread as guilt, his stillness as defiance. Not a single person in that store paused to ask if the accusation had any proof behind it. The shopkeeper's voice had shaped the entire room's opinion, and the boy's reality didn't stand a chance against it. What hurt more than the accusation itself was how easily people accepted it, how quickly they made room for the worst version of him in their minds without even knowing his name. In a matter of seconds, he wasn't just accused, he was condemned. Not in a court, not in front of a judge, but in the casual cruelty of public opinion, where suspicion spreads faster than truth, and where silence is rarely on the side of the innocent. The accusation didn't stay in the store. It spilled out onto the street, carried by whispers that traveled faster than truth ever could. Within hours, people he had never spoken to began looking at him differently. Their stares lingered longer, not with curiosity but with quiet suspicion. Neighbors who once offered polite nods stopped meeting his eyes. Some pulled their children closer when he walked by. Others crossed the street entirely. No one asked him what happened. No one gave him the benefit of the doubt. Instead, the shopkeeper's word had become the town's truth. The story twisted as it spread. What had started as a claim turned into certainty. He hadn't just been accused, he had, in the minds of many, already been caught. And the worst part was how quickly people accepted it. There was no proof, no footage shown, no investigation. But that didn't matter. He fit the role too well in their eyes. A quiet boy from modest means, with nothing flashy to suggest innocence or privilege. The story didn't need to be true. It just needed to be repeated enough to become accepted. Soon, the whispers turned into judgment that touched every part of his life. Shop owners began to watch him when he entered, if they let him enter at all. Strangers he had never wronged talked about him as if they knew his intentions. At school, some of his classmates repeated the rumors they'd heard at home. They laughed behind his back or stared at him like he was someone else entirely. Teachers grew colder, offering less patience as if the accusation had changed the way they saw his future. The shift was quiet, but unmistakable. Doors closed, figuratively and literally. The kindness he had once received was replaced with distance. Conversations fell silent when he entered a room. No one said the word thief to his face again, but it hung in the air round him like smoke, thick, bitter, and impossible to escape. He tried to act normal, tried to hold his head up, but the weight of being misjudged pressed heavier with each passing day. He didn't lash out or try to fight the rumors, not because he agreed with them, but because he didn't know how to fight something so large and invisible. How do you defend yourself against a story that people want to believe? How do you speak when no one is listening anymore? So he stayed silent, not out of weakness, but because he could feel the world had already made up its mind, and in that silence the wound grew deeper, not from the accusation itself, but from how eagerly everyone joined in, how willingly they abandoned fairness, and how easily they turned a boy into a criminal without ever asking why. The tide began. To turn the day, someone finally chose to ask for proof. It wasn't an act of defense or defiance. It was a simple request made out of principle. A woman from the town council, known more for her quiet fairness than for public displays, asked the shopkeeper if there was any footage to support what had been said so loudly. At first, there was hesitation. The cameras, the shopkeeper claimed, didn't work properly. But with gentle persistence and the growing weight of the rumor spreading through town, the footage was retrieved. What it revealed left no room for interpretation. The boy had walked in calmly, holding his coins, scanning the shelves slowly. His movements were deliberate, cautious, almost timid. At one point he reached for an item, but stopped. A moment. Later he picked something up from the ground, an item that had likely been dropped by another customer, and placed it neatly back on the shelf. Then he walked to the counter, ready to pay. There was no theft, no suspicious behavior, no crime. Just a boy trying to make a purchase with care and respect. And yet, he had been accused, judged, and humiliated, all without this evidence ever being checked. The woman who reviewed the footage didn't rush to expose it. She watched it several times, perhaps out of disbelief, or maybe sadness at what it represented. The video didn't just clear a name, it exposed a failure. A collective failure of perception, of judgment, of conscience. It showed not just the boy's innocence, but the speed at which people had been willing to believe the worst. It showed faces in the background, people standing in the store, nodding, whispering, watching. It showed a community that had chosen noise over truth, assumption over fact. And worst of all, it showed how easily they had abandoned fairness, how quickly they had replaced it with a label no one had earned. When the truth surfaced, it did more than repair a name. It cast a mirror across the town. It forced people to confront what they had done, not just to a boy, but to themselves. The shopkeeper's voice, once so loud, began to falter. Those who had passed judgment fell silent, and yet none of them had suffered what the boy had. Their reputations remained untouched. Their days carried on as before, but his trust in the people around him had cracked, maybe permanently, because while the truth had come too late for damage to be undone, it came just in time to remind them all that a lie can take hold in seconds, but the cost of believing it without question can linger for a lifetime. When the footage was finally shown, it didn't play in a courtroom or on a large public screen. It was presented in a small town meeting, attended by those who had followed the rumor, repeated it, or simply allowed it to live unchallenged. As the video played, the room grew still. The silence wasn't polite. It was heavy, thick with the weight of realization. People shifted in their chairs, eyes lowered, arms crossed tightly across chests. Some couldn't even look at the screen. The truth was clear and undeniable. The boy, accused so publicly, had done nothing wrong. The clip showed every movement, his careful hands, his cautious steps, the small act of returning a misplaced item. It wasn't just proof of innocence. It was a mirror to their own behavior. No one had asked questions. No one had paused to think. They had watched the accusation unfold, and instead of standing up for fairness, they had followed the crowd. The shopkeeper, who had been so certain and loud, sat stone-faced. His confidence was gone. The same voice that once echoed with accusation had nothing to say now. A few people tried to offer apologies, but the words were mumbled, fragmented, and empty. What could they say that would make up for the humiliation, the isolation, the pain of being branded a thief by an entire community? He hadn't just been embarrassed. He had been reshaped in their eyes, and that kind of wound runs deeper than anyone sees. Now, the people who caused it were forced to sit with what they'd done, and the silence between them spoke louder than any defense they might have offered. He stood there too, but not to prove anything anymore. He had already been proven right. His innocence didn't need to shout. It stood on its own, clear and unshakable. He didn't gloat. He didn't glare. He simply allowed the moment to unfold, knowing there was more power in his silence than in their excuses. For the first time, they were forced to look inward, to see the damage they had done with their assumptions, their whispers, their willingness to believe the worst. That silence lingered long after the footage ended. Conversations afterward were quiet, hesitant, broken by long pauses. What had once been casual gossip was now exposed as a form of cruelty. The town didn't just see the boy differently, they began to see themselves differently too. They had been so sure, so quick to point fingers, and now that certainty had been replaced by shame. Not the loud, angry kind, but the quiet, honest kind that makes people reconsider the next word they say, the next judgment they make, the next moment when they have a choice to speak up, or stay silent. He never asked for apologies, but some came anyway, hesitant at first, awkward and incomplete, but real. A few people approached him quietly in the days that followed, their voices softer, their eyes more honest. They didn't try to excuse what they had believed or said. They simply admitted they had been wrong. Others didn't say anything at all, but their actions began to shift. The same people who once avoided him now made room for him in conversations. Doors that had closed started to open again. Teachers grew more attentive. Shopkeepers no longer watched him when he entered. Even children who once echoed their parents' whispers began to greet him with shy glances instead of cold stares. The town had not forgotten what it did, but it was trying, in small, steady ways, to make something better out of what had been broken. The boy, for his part, never changed his tone. He carried himself with the same quiet presence he always had. He didn't seek revenge, recognition, or sympathy. All he ever wanted was to be seen clearly, not through the haze of prejudice or rumor, but as he truly was. In time, that clarity began to take hold. His name, once tangled in false accusation, was spoken now with something closer to respect, not because he had become someone new, but because the town had finally taken the time to understand who he'd been all along. Even the shopkeeper, after much hesitation, approached him. The offer wasn't extravagant. It was a job, something simple, something honest, not as a handout, but as an attempt to rebuild trust. And while the wound of the accusation could never be erased, the gesture mattered, because trust, once broken, is never restored by words alone. It's rebuilt through action, through showing up again and again, with humility and consistency. He took the job, not to prove a point, but because he believed that moving forward mattered more than holding on to anger. Over time, the boy grew into a young man whose story quietly shaped the way the town treated its people. He became a reminder of what happens when assumptions replace truth, when silence enables harm, and when a single lie is left unchallenged. But more importantly, he became a reminder of the strength it takes to stand quietly in the storm and wait for truth to rise. The town didn't change overnight, but it did begin to watch its words more carefully. It began to listen longer, ask more questions, and give people the chance to be more than what others said about them. And all because one boy, once falsely accused, chose not to shout, but to stand with quiet dignity until the truth spoke loud enough for everyone to hear.